It's April 19, 1943. 300 meters beneath the cold Atlantic waters, the German submarine U-515 sat motionless in the darkness, its crew breathing shallow breaths in the stale air. Captain Lieutenant Werner Henke stood in the control room, hands clasped behind his back, listening to the rhythmic ping of enemy sonar sweeping overhead. The convoy they had been tracking was long gone, but 4 American destroyer escorts remained above, their propellers churning the water in patient circles. Henke smiled slightly, confident in his strategy. His crew had done this before, wait in silent running until the enemy gave up and moved on. What none of them could have known was that their own machinery was about to become their greatest betrayer, and that the Americans above had developed a new technique that would transform submarine warfare forever. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What followed over the next 32 hours would shatter every assumption Henke held about underwater warfare, revealing how technological innovation on the surface had rendered his entire tactical playbook obsolete, and how the very systems meant to keep his submarine alive would instead announce its presence with devastating clarity. Werner Henke had earned his reputation through 23 successful patrols across the Atlantic. At 34 years old, he commanded one of the Type 9C submarines, 76 meters long with 48 crew members. His service record showed 12 Allied vessels sent to the bottom, totaling over 53,000 tons. The Iron Cross first-class recipient 5 months earlier, his crew trusted him completely. The submarine's chief engineer, Oberleutnant Klaus Zimmermann, monitored the electric motor gauges. At 41, the former merchant marine engineer knew every sound the machinery made. Beside him, Matrosengerfreiter Hans Becker, 19 and on his second patrol, tried to control his breathing in the increasingly thick air. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. They could remain submerged perhaps another day, before the atmosphere became truly dangerous. Above the waves, 4 destroyer escorts maintained their search pattern. The USS Flaherty, USS Pillsbury, USS Pope, and USS Chatelain had been hunting submarines for 8 months under Captain Daniel Gallery. These vessels, 93 meters long, were built specifically for anti-submarine operations with the latest detection equipment. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery studied the ocean's surface from the Flaherty's bridge. At 32, with 18 months of Atlantic experience and 7 successful submarine hunts, he understood the patience this work required. But Avery possessed something U-515's commander did not know existed: a new technique from the Naval Research Laboratory that could identify unique acoustic signatures revealing not just submarine presence, but specific systems and operational state. Lieutenant Robert Chen, the Flaherty's sonar operator, sat with headphones pressed against his ears. At 26, the Berkeley engineering graduate had been trained in a classified program teaching operators to distinguish submarine machinery sounds: diesel engines, electric motors, air compressors, cooling pumps. Chen adjusted his equipment, listening intently. Beneath surface waves and distant whale calls, he detected something else: a low-frequency hum, barely perceptible, pulsing with mechanical regularity. He reached for the intercom. "Captain Sonar, I have a persistent mechanical signature at bearing 270, frequency approximately 60 Hertz. It's not propulsion, too steady, too low. If I had to guess, cooling pumps or battery ventilation. They're running something down there." The pattern was familiar from training. Submarines running silent would shut down non-essential systems, but certain equipment had to continue operating. Batteries generated heat, motors needed cooling, air purification removed carbon dioxide. Each produced noise, and new hydrophone technology could detect these sounds at previously impossible ranges. This hunting technique was revolutionary, not just detection but persistence. The American destroyer escorts had refueled 30 hours earlier, carrying enough fuel for another week of searching. Their crews worked in shifts, maintaining constant vigilance while sustaining a comfortable rhythm of sleep, meals, and rest. Aboard U-515, the atmosphere was deteriorating. Carbon dioxide levels caused headaches and difficulty concentrating. Temperature had climbed to 28 degrees, humidity near 100%. Condensation dripped from pipes. They had been submerged 19 hours. Henke consulted with Zimmermann in voices barely above a whisper. The battery charge stood at 42%, enough for perhaps 12 more hours of minimal electrical use. After that, they would need to surface and run the diesel engines to recharge, exposing themselves to attack. The captain's strategy depended on the American vessels departing before that deadline arrived. "We maintain silent running," Henke said quietly. "They cannot stay forever. Destroyer escorts like these carry perhaps 5 days of fuel when fully loaded. They have already been searching for most of a day. Their commanders will need to rejoin the convoy escort or return to base. We simply wait them out." Zimmermann nodded but looked troubled. Herr Kalun, the auxiliary cooling pump for the electric motors, has been running continuously. The motors generate significant heat even at minimal speed, and without cooling, we risk damage to the commutators. I can shut it down for periods, but not indefinitely. Henke considered this. How much noise does it produce? Zimmermann shrugged slightly. Very little, he believed. The pump was small, designed for efficiency rather than power. It produced a gentle hum that seemed insignificant compared to the rushing of propellers or the ping of active sonar. In the enclosed space of the submarine, surrounded by the louder sounds of men breathing, equipment humming and the ocean pressing against the hull, the cooling pump seemed like the least of their worries. "Keep it running," Henke decided. "We cannot risk motor damage. The sound is negligible." That assessment, based on reasonable assumptions and previous experience, would prove catastrophically wrong. The acoustic environment had changed in ways that submarine commanders could not yet comprehend. The American hydrophone systems, combined with signal processing techniques developed in the past year, could detect and isolate sounds that would have been invisible to earlier equipment. Lieutenant Chen continued his vigil in the sonar room, recording observations every 15 minutes. The mechanical signature remained constant, a low hum that never varied in frequency or amplitude. He consulted his reference materials, comparing the sound to recordings made during training exercises with American submarines. The pattern matched what engineers called a centrifugal pump operating under steady load, most likely part of a cooling system. What made this signature valuable was its persistence. A submarine running truly silent would show no mechanical sounds whatsoever, only the subtle creaks of hull compression and occasional movement by crew members. But maintaining complete silence required accepting considerable risk. Batteries could overheat, motors could fail, and air could become toxic. Most submarine commanders chose to run minimal systems, believing the noise they produced was too faint for detection. They were wrong, and they had no way of knowing it. Captain Gallery, commanding the escort group, received regular updates on the acoustic contact. He consulted with his operations officer, studying charts of the search area. The submarine had not moved in over 18 hours, a clear indication that its commander was attempting to wait out the pursuit. Gallery had seen this tactic before. He also knew that submarines had finite endurance while submerged. "We maintain the search pattern," Gallery ordered. "Rotate the vessels so that one is always directly over the contact zone. No active sonar unless we prepare for attack. I want that commander to believe we have lost him right up until the moment we have not." The psychological dimension of this hunt was as important as the technical aspects. A submarine captain who believed he was undetected would remain in place, conserving battery power and waiting for his pursuers to depart. But a captain who knew he was being tracked might attempt to escape, using valuable battery charge to move to a new location or potentially surfacing to make a high-speed run on diesel power. Gallery wanted U-515 to stay exactly where it was, slowly exhausting its resources while his vessels maintained their watch. As night fell on the second day, conditions aboard had become nearly unbearable. Men moved slowly, conserving oxygen. Carbon dioxide caused nausea and disorientation. Temperature remained oppressively high, everyone soaked with sweat and condensation. Young Hans Becker struggled to focus on the trim tank indicators. He had not eaten in 12 hours. Food made his stomach rebel. Battery charge had reached 31%. Zimmermann reported to Henke with growing concern about the battery levels. They were below the threshold he considered safe for emergency maneuvers. "How long since we last heard propeller sounds overhead?" Henke asked. 4 hours, Herr Kallen, the hydrophone operator reported. The last vessel passed to the north at 14:20 hours. This was encouraging. 4 hours without detecting enemy vessels suggested that the Americans had indeed departed, expanding their search to other areas or returning to their convoy escort duties. Henke allowed himself a moment of relief. His strategy had worked. They had outlasted the pursuit. "We will remain submerged until full darkness," he announced quietly. "Then we surface, run the diesels to recharge, and proceed to our assigned patrol sector." "Well done, gentlemen. Your discipline has saved this boat." The crew exchanged tired smiles. They had survived. Soon they would surface, breathe fresh air, and let the engines roar. The ordeal was nearly over. What they did not know was that the Americans had not departed at all. The destroyer escorts had adjusted their search pattern, deliberately moving beyond hydrophone range of the submarine while maintaining a distant watch on the exact position where that telltale cooling pump continued its steady hum. The vessels ran in a wide circle just beyond the horizon, ready to converge the moment U-515 began to surface. Lieutenant Chen had briefed his relief operator on the acoustic signature to monitor. The sound had not varied in amplitude or frequency for 30 hours straight, a level of consistency that confirmed it as mechanical rather than biological. Every 15 minutes, one of the destroyer escorts would move close enough for its hydrophones to verify that the signature persisted, then withdraw again. Captain Gallery reviewed the plan with his officers. "The moment we detect any change in acoustic signature, increased machinery noise, ballast tank blowing, anything that indicates surfacing, we converge at flank speed from all 4 directions. I want depth charges ready, but not deployed, unless absolutely necessary. Our objective is capture, not destruction. Not." This instruction reflected a relatively recent priority change in American anti-submarine operations. Early in the conflict, the focus had been purely on attrition, but by 1943, intelligence officers recognized the immense value of capturing enemy vessels intact. Codebooks, cipher machines, technical documentation, and the opportunity to interrogate experienced crew members could provide intelligence worth more than simply adding another number to the tally of enemy losses. As darkness fell on April 20th, Henke made his decision. Battery charge had dropped to 28%, and carbon dioxide levels had reached dangerous concentrations. Several crew members showed signs of poisoning, confusion, tremors, and irregular breathing. They could not remain submerged any longer without risking the lives of everyone aboard. "Prepare to surface," he ordered. "Battle stations. We proceed on the assumption that we are alone, but remain vigilant. If we encounter enemy vessels, we crash dive immediately." The crew moved to their positions with practiced efficiency, despite their exhausted state. Compressed air systems were prepared to blow ballast tanks. Diesel engines were readied for immediate start. Henke took a deep breath of the foul air and gave the command. Surface. All ahead slow. Compressed air roared into the ballast tanks, forcing water out and reducing the submarine's weight. U-515 began to rise, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The depth gauge numbers decreased, 200 meters, 150, 100. In the control room, men exchanged glances of anticipation. Fresh air was minutes away. At 75 meters depth, the hydrophone operator's expression changed. "Herr Kallen, I have multiple propeller contacts, high speed, converging from all directions." Henke's blood went cold. "Emergency dive. All ahead full. Take us down." But it was already too late. The submarine had positive buoyancy, rising like a cork despite their efforts to reverse the process. The laws of physics cared nothing for desperate commands. Water rushed back into ballast tanks, but the process took time. Time they did not have. U-515 broke surface in the darkness, water streaming from its conning tower, diesel engines coughing to life. Henke scrambled up the ladder to the bridge, hoping against hope that they might have a chance to run, to fight, to do anything except surrender. What he saw destroyed that hope instantly. 4 destroyer escorts converged from different directions, searchlights blazing to life, illuminating the submarine in brilliant white light. The vessels had positioned themselves perfectly, cutting off every possible escape route. Their weapons were trained on the submarine, but notably, they were not firing. A loudspeaker crackled to life from the nearest destroyer. German submarine, this is the United States ship Flaherty. You are surrounded and cannot escape. Shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any attempt to dive or resist will result in your immediate destruction. You have 60 seconds to comply. Henke stood on the bridge, water still dripping from his uniform, and understood that he had been comprehensively outmaneuvered. The Americans had not left. They had never left. For 32 hours they had maintained watch, waiting for exactly this moment. His strategy of patience had been turned against him, and the enemy's endurance had exceeded his own by an impossible margin. Below, Zimmermann stared at the battery gauge showing 28% and understood what Henke had already realized. Even if they attempted to dive, they lacked the power for extended evasion. Even if they somehow escaped this immediate trap, they would be forced to surface again within hours in daylight, with enemy aircraft likely joining the pursuit. They had been beaten not by superior force of arms, but by superior technology and tactics they had not known existed. Henke gave the order he had never imagined giving. Shut down all systems. Prepare to abandon ship. We are surrendering. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. 23 successful patrols, 12 enemy vessels accounted for, the Iron Cross First Class, all of it rendered meaningless in this single moment of comprehensive defeat. But the alternative was death for his entire crew, and that was a price he would not pay for pride. As American sailors in small boats approached to take the Germans into custody, Lieutenant Chen removed his headphones and stretched tired muscles. He had maintained his acoustic vigil for nearly 33 hours straight, with only brief breaks. His concentration had enabled the successful tracking and capture of an enemy submarine that believed itself invisible. The cooling pump that had betrayed U-515's position had likely saved the lives of its crew. The Americans had been able to track without losing contact, preventing the need for aggressive depth charge attacks that had characterized earlier submarine hunts. The capture of U-515 represented a watershed moment in anti-submarine warfare, though its full significance would not be recognized for some time. The submarine's codebooks and cipher equipment provided valuable intelligence, but the greater prize was the psychological impact on other submarine commanders. As word spread through interrogation reports and eventually through captured crew members sharing their experiences, German submarine captains learned that the acoustic environment had changed. The invisible shroud that once protected submarines running silent had become transparent to new detection methods. Werner Henke and his crew were transported to prisoner of war facilities in the United States, where they spent the remainder of the conflict. During interrogation, Henke provided detailed accounts of his patrol procedures and tactics, information that American intelligence officers used to further refine their hunting techniques. When asked how the Americans had maintained contact with his submarine during 32 hours of silent running, he expressed genuine bafflement. He had run every scenario through his mind, and none of them accounted for the facts as he understood them. It was only after the conflict ended that Henke learned about the acoustic signature that had betrayed him. When told that a single cooling pump had announced his presence with perfect clarity for 32 hours straight, his reaction was one of stunned disbelief. The notion that such a minor system could produce detectable sound at range seemed impossible based on his understanding of underwater acoustics. But the evidence was undeniable. The technical breakthrough had roots in research that predated the conflict. Scientists studying underwater sound propagation had discovered that low-frequency mechanical sounds traveled much farther in seawater than higher-frequency sounds. The Naval Research Laboratory had developed signal processing techniques that could isolate these signatures from background ocean noise. By using multiple hydrophones and comparing the phase relationships of received signals, operators could determine not just the presence of a submarine, but its precise bearing and, with patience, a reasonably accurate range. Klaus Zimmermann, the chief engineer who had assured his captain that the cooling pump produced negligible noise, spent his internment years studying American submarine detection technology. He filled notebooks with calculations and diagrams, trying to understand how such faint sounds could be detected at such ranges. His engineering background allowed him to eventually grasp the principles involved: the low frequency of pump operation, the excellent sound transmission properties of seawater, and the extraordinary sensitivity of the latest hydrophone arrays. Young Hans Becker, the 19-year-old who had monitored trim tanks during those 32 hours of supposed invisibility, processed the experience differently. For him, the realization that they had been tracked continuously while believing themselves hidden created a profound sense of how war had been transformed by technology. The courage and seamanship that had characterized naval warfare for centuries now mattered less than technical capabilities that most sailors could not even understand. He spent his internment learning English and studying American engineering practices. When he eventually returned to Germany after the conflict ended, he carried with him a deep respect for the industrial and technical capacity that had enabled the American forces to develop such sophisticated systems in the midst of total mobilization. The 4 destroyer escorts that had captured U-515 continued their patrol duties throughout the rest of the conflict. Captain Gallery's group went on to achieve one of the most significant prizes of the Atlantic campaign, the capture of U-505 in June 1944, which provided code books and an Enigma machine that yielded critical intelligence. The tactics developed during the hunt for U-515 informed these later successes. Lieutenant Chen continued his service as a sonar operator, eventually training other operators in the acoustic analysis techniques he had helped pioneer. After the conflict ended, he returned to California and completed his engineering degree, later working for a defense contractor, developing even more sophisticated underwater detection systems. The broader implications of U-515's capture rippled through both American and German naval operations. American escort groups gained confidence in their ability to track and hold contact with submarines attempting to hide. German submarine commanders, learning through intelligence reports about the new detection capabilities, faced a terrible dilemma. Traditional silent running tactics had become inadequate, but the alternatives were equally dangerous. The result was a significant shift in operations during the final 2 years of the conflict, with submarines operating farther from major convoy routes and increasingly avoiding engagement altogether. The transformation of Werner Henke from confident submarine ace to prisoner, captured by unknown technology, represented a broader pattern. Individual courage and skill were increasingly overshadowed by industrial capacity and technological innovation. Henke maintained rigid military bearing in the prisoner camp, refusing to provide more than required information. His identity as a commander had been built on the belief that skill could overcome material disadvantage. The revelation that his careful evasion had been completely transparent undermined this foundation. The cooling pump that doomed U-515 had performed flawlessly, preventing motor overheating during 32 hours of use. Engineers who designed it would have been proud of its reliability and astonished it had served as a beacon announcing the submarine's position. This irony reflected a common pattern in technological evolution. Defensive measures created new vulnerabilities. Every solution created new problems. Every advantage had its cost. For U-515's 48 crew members, capture meant survival, a fate increasingly rare as submarine losses mounted. By 1944, loss rates approached 75% for some periods. The men who had cursed their fate during 32 hours of suffocating heat eventually recognized their capture had likely saved their lives. Werner Henke's story carried a tragic footnote. In June 1944, he attempted escape from an Arizona camp. The attempt ended with his death under circumstances that remained unclear and controversial. He had never accepted his capture or what it represented. His identity had been too thoroughly undermined by the revelation that technology he could not see had rendered his experience irrelevant. Klaus Zimmermann survived and returned to Germany. Working in civilian engineering for 4 decades, he never went back to sea. The memory of those 32 hours stayed with him. In later years, he lectured at technical universities about understanding system interactions and unintended consequences in complex machinery, never mentioning the cooling pump without a bitter smile. Hans Becker became a teacher, using his U-515 experience to illustrate how technological change had transformed warfare, making traditional martial valor increasingly irrelevant. His students were invariably struck by his description of those 32 hours, the suffocating heat, the fouled air, the growing desperation, and the terrible revelation upon surfacing that they had never been hidden at all. The story influenced post-war submarine design for decades, making acoustic quieting paramount. Engineers developed floating machinery mounts to isolate vibrations, designed special propellers to minimize cavitation noise, and created sound-absorbing materials to line submarine hulls. The competition between detection and stealth that was revealed during those 32 hours in April 1943 continued through the Cold War and beyond. The human dimension of this story, men trapped beneath the ocean, slowly suffocating while believing themselves hidden, only to discover they had been observed continuously, resonates beyond its historical context. It speaks to vulnerability inherent in warfare, the gap between perception and reality, and how technological change can render experience suddenly irrelevant. Werner Henke's confidence was entirely reasonable based on his previous experience. That it proved catastrophically wrong reflected not his failure, but the rapid pace of innovation in anti-submarine warfare. The 48 crew members each processed their capture differently, carrying away individual lessons from the experience. Some focused on gratitude of survival, others dwelt on humiliation of defeat. A few, like Klaus Zimmermann, became fascinated by the technical aspects of how they had been tracked. Many struggled with the psychological impact of learning that their period of greatest confidence in their concealment had actually been a time of complete transparency to enemy listeners. The geographic location where U-515 surrendered, approximately 600 kilometers west of the Azores, had no particular strategic significance. It was simply where the submarine encountered the convoy, where it had dived to escape, and where its batteries finally depleted. The ocean floor remains unchanged by the human drama that occurred above it, indifferent to the detection, pursuit, and capture that marked a turning point in undersea warfare. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.